Hello and welcome to Heroic Media. I'm Michelle Bauman.
And I'm Patrick Cordova.
This week on Heroic Media, the Obama administration circumvents the Supreme Court's protection of Hobby Lobby's religious freedom.
Seattle public schools come under fire for their questionable birth control policies.
And an environmental expert weighs in on the Pope's most recent encyclical.
Stay tuned for all these stories and more here on Heroic Media. So here at Heroic Media, we explore news headlines that deal with very foundational moral issues relating to family, marriage, and life.
Exactly, and those issues tend to revolve around topics like abortion, euthanasia, embryonic stem cell research, human cloning, and homosexual marriage.
Exactly. So what's our first story?
Thanks, Patrick. First up tonight, last year the Supreme Court sided with Hobby Lobby in its challenge to the federal contraception mandate. Now, the U.S. government has tweaked the mandate and says that Hobby Lobby must obey.
Wow. They tweaked it again.
Again, yeah, right? This is how many times now?
I don't know how many times, but it seriously seems like every few months or something they're tweaking this thing. And they're just trying to strike some sort of compromise is what they say that they're doing. But really the end goal, it seems like, that the Obama administration is really just bent on getting everybody free contraception. Like, it seems like that's the most important thing for them to do at all costs.
Right, exactly.
So it seems like they're trying to strike some sort of middle ground, but it's still kind of, I don't know necessarily that it's the best middle ground, but it is what it is.
It's very interesting. So to give our viewers some background, this HHS mandate, it came out several years ago now, and basically the U.S. government said, okay, employers have to pay for health insurance coverage that includes free coverage of contraceptives, sterilization, some drugs that can cause early abortions.
Yes.
Well, there was massive outcry, hundreds of lawsuits, hundreds of plaintiffs filing lawsuits against this.
Yep.
And so the Obama administration tweaked it, and then there were more complaints, and they tweaked it again and again and again and again. So it's been through a lot of different changes at this point.
Yes.
But the scheme that we have now, there's 3 tiers of religious freedom, essentially. You have houses of worship and their affiliated organizations, and those get a complete exemption.
Right.
Then you have the second tier, which is these religious nonprofits, and the government says, well, you don't get an exemption because you're not religious enough, but you get an accommodation where you can just sign this form that says that you disagree with this and give it to the government, and the government will talk to your insurance company and tell them to give this stuff
instead. Out of your pocket, insurance company, not out of the company's pocket.
Exactly. And so in theory, the way that this works is that the government claims that health or that contraception is so good for women, it has so many tremendous health benefits that it's going to bring down their overall cost of care, and so for the insurance company it ends up being cost neutral, which is questionable. And then the third tier is for-profit companies like Hobby Lobby or like other companies that are just owned by people who object to this, and the government says you don't get any religious accommodation because you're a for-profit company.
Yes.
So last year the Supreme Court came in and said nope, that doesn't work for Hobby Lobby and closely held companies where the family's running it, that doesn't work. So now what the government's saying in response is, okay, well, we're going to move you to that second tier. Now you fall under the accommodation. Still don't get an exemption, but we're going to put you on this other tier.
Very well explained. That was very succinct. Yep. And so, it still puts, there's a couple of things that still just kind of are like annoying about it to me, I guess. And one of those is that, what is to stop the insurance company from just hiking up prices? They say, oh, well, they're just they haven't like reached out to insurance companies and said, hey, you guys won't do this or sign some sort of agreement or put any law into place or anything, then checks and balances to make sure that this doesn't happen. But they're just saying, oh, insurance companies won't increase their rates because they're now going to be paying for, out of their pocket, contraceptives that you don't want to cover. But what's to say that the insurance company just won't raise them up? And so, like you explained earlier, their whole defense is like, well, because the benefits are going to lower actually by giving them free contraception, the cost that insurance company will incur because of that out of their pocket will actually offset or at least equalize, if not more, it sounds like they're saying, the cost as if they didn't take that contraception, that birth control. So if somebody didn't take contraception and had a child, for instance, and the insurance company had to pay thousands of dollars, they're saying, well, it's cheaper that the insurance company just pay like $15 a month or whatever it is for birth control, and that would be a lot less than if they had a kid, is essentially what I get out of it.
Right, yeah, and so there's a lot of questions about this, and one of the things that the U.S. bishops have spoken out most against is this tiered system, because whatever the accommodation is, whether or not people find that acceptable for the religious groups, it's problematic to say, well, some groups are treated with this amount of religious freedom, and these groups have a lesser amount, and these groups have, you can't have tiers. That's a totally foreign concept to the American structure.
And that's one thing that this administration has done a lot, it seems like, is they've tried to put people's religious beliefs into a little box that only occurs 1 hour on Sunday. And then outside of that, it doesn't matter what you do or anything, you will follow what the government wants you to believe about certain things like contraception, etc. So yeah, it's not much of an accommodation, but I mean, I guess it could be worse, but it also could be better. So.
And we keep seeing the lawsuits pile up, so we'll see how those play out in the courts.
Yep, exactly. It's still not completely over yet, for sure. All right, in our next story, middle and high school students at 13 Seattle public schools can't get junk food, but they can get an IUD implanted without parental knowledge or permission. Seems like a pretty good plan.
Yeah, I mean, those chocolate bars are way more dangerous than IUDs.
Yeah, it's just crazy. So I guess they've had this this whole candy bar, or junk food law.
Can't have Coca-Cola.
Yeah, no Coca-Cola, no candy and stuff like that since like 2004. And then the school board there recently, I guess, voted on this. And essentially, it kind of sounds like it's based on a law there that essentially says anybody has privacy, meaning like anybody any age, has ultimate privacy to get contraceptives when it comes to reproductive health. And so that's what I guess, how they can get away with saying, oh no, you don't have to have any parental consent. And so it's just really disturbing on a lot of different levels. There's several things that are wrong with it. I mean, the first thing right off the bat I think we should talk about is side effects, right? Like, you're saying, no, you can't eat this candy bar. You're making like a candy bar more dangerous than an IUD. But let's take a look at some of the dangers of IUDs alone.
Are they dangerous? I looked up some of the side effects. Well, your uterus could get perforated, cut open by this device. You could get infections. You're at risk for mood changes, weight gain, ovarian cysts, depression, irregular bleeding, and a life-threatening ectopic pregnancy. But apart from that, you're pretty clear. So, I mean, this is just unthinkable to me that they're going to put this device inside of your daughter, 11, 12 years old, without informing you. Because in what other way do we see an 11, 12-year-old girl as being responsible or mature enough to make her own decisions about life? There's so many things that she is not allowed to do at that age. We don't allow her to drink. We don't allow her to drive. We don't allow her to, I mean, so many different things.
Like there's so many things.
But when it comes to this device that does have these side effects, that's a serious medical decision.
That could
we're
kill
saying,
you.
oh yeah, your parents don't need to know about it. That's really alarming.
It is really alarming, and that's the thing that's the other thing. It's just so scary because it's like you take away the control of. And that's what's really happening with a lot of these laws and the way things are going, is that it's almost like the government and the state can decide what's right for your kid, but you don't have the opportunity to, there's no opportunity for a teaching moment. Like, for instance, if your child came to you and was like, hey, I want to get an IUD, that could be a good teaching moment for you to intervene and stop things, especially while they're under your care, while they're not considered adults. And so I think it's dangerous because of course they're going to they don't want their parents to know about it, right? And they even go so far as if that child has health insurance, like under their parents' carrier, they won't bill the parents' insurance company so that, their parents don't open up a bill and are like, wait, what's this charge for, $150 for IUD? You didn't tell me about this. So they'll actually pay for it, taxpayer-funded money. Right. And so that the kid can get it for free without the parents knowing. Right. So it almost seems like they go to these extreme lengths just so that
Just so the
anybody
parents
can
don't know.
have free
Exactly.
access to any, these types of birth control, and nobody has to know about it except for them and the person who's doing it for them.
Right, and the other thing that I found really alarming, and this really made me mad about this, was that they took this survey of the health providers in these school programs, and they basically said, we haven't received formal training on how to do this. And the risk for complications with IUDs increases significantly if the person putting it in is inexperienced.
Yep.
And so you're taking these girls and you're taking their lives and their health and their safety and their well-being in your hands, and you're saying, oh, we'll take the people who have the least training and the least experience. We won't teach them how to do this, and we'll say, here, go put this device in this girl's body, no parental permission, no parental consent. That's really gambling with these girls' lives and well-beings, and that really frustrates me. That should anger everyone.
It should anger everyone. And whose problem is it going to be when something goes awry and all of a sudden, something happens and your daughter's bleeding internally and she's scared to tell her
parents,
scared to
and
tell
they don't know what's
anything.
going on.
I mean, at that point, it always affects other people, your decisions.
Absolutely.
And even when you don't think that it affects other people, right? It does. It will down the line. It might not right this second, but it will and it can affect all kinds of people that you didn't. There's so many different scenarios that I've seen throughout my life and experiences that I've had, especially with other people where they're like, oh, this doesn't affect you, blah, blah, blah. And then, 3 years down the line, the whole thing, a whole bunch of problems arose, and yes, it does. It comes back around.
Yeah, absolutely.
And this is just one of those cases, and a parent should be involved. So
Absolutely, that's the bottom line.
Yep, exactly.
Coming up after the break, we'll talk about the Pope's most recent encyclical and the Catholic response.
Stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to Heroic Media. In case you're just joining us, I'm Patrick Cordova.
And I'm Michelle Bauman. In our next story, Pope Francis's newest encyclical, Laudato Si, is continuing to make headlines with Catholics discussing the proper response to the Pope's words.
Good stuff. It was an interesting read. I'm not all the way through it yet, but there was a lot of things that I've read in there that are really thought-provoking, and obviously it's caused a lot of people. I've seen a lot of secular sources talking about it too. So it's good to have somebody on the show, a guest on the show, that can kind of give their 2 cents about it.
Right, absolutely. So Laudato Si, it's an encyclical on the environment, lots of other topics that we touch on in there. I actually had the opportunity to sit down with Ricardo Simmonds, who is the founder of Creatio, a ministry that deals with reconciling man's view of nature and God. He had some very interesting things to say. Let's take a look. Ricardo, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
So this show deals with topics of human life, marriage, and family, and this is an encyclical that talks about the environment. Are those 2 things connected, or are they completely separate?
Absolutely. In fact, that's one of the main points that Pope Francis is trying to make. An often repeated phrase in the encyclical 6 or 7 times is everything is connected, everything is interconnected. And he's trying to state the value of life, human life, and also the value of creation. And it's really an appeal to see the world in an integral way and the interconnectedness of everything.
How are we to think about the relationship between human life and nature? Are they on the same plane? Is one of them more important? Can we disregard one and pay attention to the other?
Yeah, Pope Francis makes the point, and he really goes to the biblical roots and the foundations of a Christian understanding of creation. So he recognizes the inherent value of creation, but at the same time emphasizes the unique dignity of human beings. So both are willed and loved by God, but human beings are called to a special relationship and have a unique vocation within God's plan.
Now the Pope uses the phrase human ecology several times throughout the encyclical. Can you comment a little bit about that? What does that mean?
Absolutely, and that's something that he very much inherited from Pope John Paul II, who used that phrase in a moment where environmental awareness was coming about. And people were recognizing in biology and ecology these rules and this certain natural law in nature and creation, and applying it to the human life, that there are certain moral norms in our being that God has imprinted in the human heart that have to be followed and respected as well. So it's drawing the lessons from ecology and applying to human beings, and that we need to respect our own dignity and the laws that God imprinted in our own hearts.
So really this encyclical is very much affirming of human life as well. It's not just about the environment, but it's showing that the two, as you said, are always connected. Now, one of the more controversial things has been the question of climate change. Did the Pope get the science on this wrong? How are we to respond to that?
Yeah, in fact, I looked at this very carefully. I studied and I did a thesis on climate change. And Cardinal Turkson, in the presentation, he stated it clearly that they were very careful with their wording on climate change. And it's a very complex issue itself, that's said in the encyclical. And there's nothing wrong from the technical or moral or theological point of view that Pope has said. In fact, it is very carefully articulated, recognizing that there are problems and that climate change is happening, but being very cautious in affirming correlation rather than causality, and recognizing that there are effects of climate change, especially on the poor, and that's what we should focus on, regardless of the causes. They affirm both natural and human-made causes, but the focus is always on people, on the poor, and protecting creation as well.
Okay, I'm going to read just a couple quotes here. I really want our viewers to see that there are some very strong pro-life statements in this encyclical, and then I'd like to get your response. On abortion, the Pope says, "Concern for the protection of nature is also incompatible with the justification of abortion." On embryo experimentation, he says, "There is a tendency to justify transgressing all boundaries when experimentation is carried out on living embryos." And he contrasts this with the way that some people want to protect experimenting on animals, but they're okay with experimenting on human embryos. And then on population control, he says, "It must be recognized that demographic growth is fully compatible with an integral and shared development." So in other words, the people are not the problems. We need to find new ways of doing things and resources, but it's the people are not the problems.
Absolutely, and I think this is an extraordinary pro-life message, mainly because of the people who are reading it. I mean, people all over the world are very interested and intrigued. Some who I never think would be interested in a papal document are reading it now, and the Pope, in a very artful and apologetic manner, is making a pro-life claim, but by talking about this interconnectedness of reality. And a Christian, it's really a Trinitarian view of the world, where the Trinity, and he quotes St. Bonaventure on this, the Trinity bears its mark upon all creatures, and the same way we need to respect creatures, animals, and plants. So because of that, furthermore, we should respect human life. But the appeal is very clear, but it's something that I think many secular ears can listen to. And it could be for many people the first time they hear a compelling and well-articulated argument that doesn't push them away, but invites them to reflect and consider the arguments for a pro-life position. So I think it's a great apologetic encyclical as well.
Absolutely. Can you give us a couple of practical examples of ways that Catholics could maybe put this into practice? What are some practical takeaways that they might have?
Yeah, and there are many, and in the Pope's style, he's very pastorally practical, and he does a lot of things. I mean, one of his strong criticisms is on consumerism and a culture of consumption, what he calls a throwaway culture. And that in our personal lives, even if these things are symbolic, we can change our lifestyle. For example, maybe use less air conditioning or buy less things that we don't need. But there are also positive ways. I mean, in essence, what we really need to do is connect to the source of all this, which is God. It's a call to holiness, to conversion. And in that way, he says it himself. How about we respect the Sabbath? We really take Sunday off and respect the rhythm that God has imprinted in nature and rest. How about we pray before meals and rescue this very Christian practice and thank God for the food that we have, and really live a healthy spiritual life. I think the core message is, if we are true Christians, good Christians, and follow the life of Jesus, we will be doing good for the environment. So it's a call to be saints, to really follow the Lord in our lives.
I think that's a really important point, and one that people might miss if they don't really read through the whole thing.
Absolutely. It's a complex and an almost prophetic document. Arino from First Things made this insight. I thought it was really good. It is not a linear insight into social teaching. It's a prophetic call to wake up the world. And that's what the Pope is inviting us, is to conversion. It reminds me of the prophets, of John the Baptist, of Ezekiel. And I think it's a beautiful and well-articulated document. And if we get stuck in the details and discussions about climate change, we're going to miss the main point, which is this call to conversion and a beautiful Christian life.
Absolutely. One last question. What are the implications for political decisions and voting that come out of this document?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion on the media about this, and I think this is an example of how we need to make an effort to step away from our political paradigms and frameworks and try and make the Pope's message fit into our preconceived notions, but rather be open to what he has to say, be open to this prophetic call to change our hearts, to think differently, and to really live converted, healthy Christian lives. That is really the essence of this, and it's an invitation for us to follow the Lord more closely.
I think that's really well said. Thank you so much for being here, Ricardo.
Thank you, Michelle.
That was good stuff. It was a good conversation. I think there's so much that we could say about this this document. You know, the thing that I got out of it the most was that human life does not equal. Although nature is important and the environment is definitely important, it all starts with human life and our view of human life. And if we can't care for the most fragile, small human life, then how can we care about the other, you know, all the other things about the environment and how they interact in plants and animals, etc. So that was one of the things that I took out of it.
Yeah, and the Pope says that directly. He says, you know, there's a primacy that human life has.
Yes.
And even, you know, in talking about one point that I just thought was really good was that in talking about this, it's not about nature for the sake of nature. We're not environmentalists for the sake of environmentalism.
Yes.
We're Catholic, and so it's all about the conversion of heart.
Yes.
And if our hearts are being converted and we're becoming more Christ-like, then we care about creation because God created it.
Yes.
And so conversion is really at the center of this encyclical. I think that's a really important point.
Absolutely, because if you can't convert yourself, and that's the thing too, you got to convert yourself first, then you can convert others, and then from there, outwardly, we can treat the environment better because we have an understanding about God, each other, and nature, and how that all that relates. And I like that Pope Francis also, you know, mentioned at the end that he said, you know, it's okay to disagree. Basically, is what he said with some of the scientific things mentioned in here. You know, and science is like that. You know, it's like, well, you know, is Pluto a planet or is it not a planet? You know, it seems like they're always changing stuff, and so. So I like that he kind of threw that little caveat out there, but the big thing that I got out of it was that centrality of the human person, and you know, starting at that conversion at the core of yourself, and then everything kind of radiates from out there. And yes, those are important. Earth is where we live. We need to take care of it, etc. But it all starts with that, with you in that conversion.
Absolutely, I think that's very well spoken.
Yep. All right, stay tuned. We have one more story coming up after the break. Welcome back to Heroic Media. In our final story, Heroic Media News Director Jenny Uebbing reflects on the question, are we all a little oversexed? So, interesting question.
Interesting question.
All right, so this came about because she was at a bridal shower recently, and you know, all the women were around opening gifts and talking, and basically what she got were two things out of, two bits of advice from married women that were in the group. And those two things were very oversexed, I guess. And so she asked her, you know, she's asking the question, like, it seems like marriage and sex, and we seem to be in a very oversexed society, especially in this situation where there was two Christian people who were virgins who were getting ready to be married, and then they're receiving all this advice about what to do. And the first advice was, you know, you have to wear like costumes and role play, and you have to do, you know, buy this fancy lingerie and everything so that you, so that your husband doesn't get bored and go, you know, cheat on you. I was like, that's horrible advice, like a horrible outlook, I guess, on marriage. That's just a horrible piece of advice. And the second thing was that you have to have this vow. You should take a vow of whenever, wherever makes a happy, healthy marriage and a satisfied man. So basically what that says is just you need to, anytime your husband says, let's have sex, we need to, no matter when, where, or whatever, no matter how you're feeling. So she kind of reflected on those things as being a married woman, having children, and, you know, and her experience in marriage thus far. And I think that a lot of what she says is true, and especially about like how society influences our view on sex and marriage. What did you think?
I think that's very true. I think, you know, what she's saying is that there's this view sort of brought about by contraception that we are all entitled to have sex whenever we want, however much, that it's an entitlement. And she's saying that that's kind of leaked into sort of our Christian mindset sometimes, and you can kind of see it. And I thought that, you know, she says our appetites and our expectations for sex have outstripped reality. What if sex, rather than being an adult entitlement, is an immense privilege and a gift? What if we're not actually entitled to as much of it as we might want? And I think that's such an interesting question. If you actually treat this as a gift, then it just changes your mindset on it. And it's not this contraceptive mindset of, I'm going to sterilize myself, I'm going to break down my body so it doesn't do what it's supposed to do, so that I can have consequence-free sex whenever I want. And instead you're saying, okay, well, maybe those times of abstinence during NFP, maybe that's okay. Maybe sex isn't something that I am entitled to demand, but maybe that's something that is a gift that I treasure when I'm able to have it, and when I'm not, you know, or abstinence before marriage. That just makes more sense. It's a better worldview. It fits together.
It is, and I think that when I read her blog on this, I think that, you know, our marriages, especially Christian marriages, especially in these times where societies are trying to redefine marriage, what it is, I think especially a Christian marriage needs to really reflect what a Christian marriage should be, and not what our society says marriage should be. And so it has a far different view, and I think that leaks in. I think pornography and just the oversexedness of our society in general is kind of what, in those two pieces of advice from those women, those married women, really reflects what their husbands are into. And it sounds like probably pornography and things like that, and looking lustfully at other women, etc. And we just have to remember that as Christians, we have to set a good example. You know, it's kind of shocking that she was in that sort of scenario, and then, you know, she got that advice. I guess maybe not shocking. We shouldn't necessarily be surprised in today's age, but we should be giving better advice and living our marriages in a different light. And you're right; it's a gift, and it should be treated that way. And, you know, every marriage, every relationship is different. They change over time, but, you know, that's something between you and your wife, and it shouldn't be this, you know, outside force that's some, you know, forced upon thing like is explained in this.
Absolutely.
So. All right, that's it for this week on Heroic Media. Please join us next week for all the up-to-date news on the pro-life issues that matter to you.
Please feel free to write to us with any comments, questions, or news tips at news@heroicmedia.org.
And please visit our website at heroicmedianews.org, where you can check out more stories like the ones we discussed on this episode.
That's it for this time. Until next week, keep us in your prayers.
God bless.